Hello students. In this unit, we are going to learn about a type of poetry called epic poetry. So here in this unit, we will learn about the concept of epic poetry and the aspects associated with oral traditional epics. Now, what is epic poetry? It is just one of the genres of poetry and a major form of a narrative literature. It is one of the oldest forms of poetry. An epic can be often defined as a long poem or a lengthy poem that narrates the adventure of a hero or a great war. And this narration is usually in a continuous form. And epic can be divided into two groups. It can be either narrative or the dramatic. In the first group, the epic of the heroic poem, the hero or the heroic poem, is the most important. An epic is a long narrative in verse on a great and serious subject related in an elevated style. And in an epic poetry, it usually tells a well-known story, or it is surrounded or centered around a heroic or a semi-divine figure whose actions depend on the fate of a tribe or a nation or a human race. And in epic poetry, the character and events are portrayed in detail. There are elaborated descriptions of places and action. So that's what makes the poetry very, very lengthy. So there are some specific features to epic poetry which are distinct of various writers, and these features have been drawn from the traditional epics. Traditional epics also has another name. It is also called as folk epics, and these are not written, but it was transferred orally from generation to generation. It was passed on from generation to generation. These are called as folk epics. Now, they were about a tribal or a national hero during a warlike age, and whereas literary epics were written by individual poets, and they did drew inspiration from the traditional form. The Latin epic poem, the Aeneid, written by Virgil, the English epic poem, Paradise Lost, written by John Milton, and Hyperion, which was written by John Keats. All these are great examples of literary epics or epic poetry. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey is also a famous Western epic, and Iliad has sustained a song of around 16,000 lines written in a dactylic hexameter. And in this poem, the poet's inspiration is very much evident, and in the poem you can also witness an authoritative tone throughout the poem. The same pattern is applied to the Odyssey as well. And the traditional epic poetry follows a ring structure, that is, the first and the last book as similar events. They almost match the same. So in Iliad, words, phrases, and sometimes entire passages are repeated by different characters in different scenes. So for example, Agamemnon sends Odysseus to Achilles to bring him back to the war. In the scene, Agamemnon asks Odysseus to make certain promises which are repeated by Odysseus to Achilles. So both these scenes are almost repeated. So whatever is said in the first part of the poetry will be repeated in the last part of the poetry. This is what makes it a traditional epic. Now, Virgil's The Aeneid is also an example of literary epic. Virgil was asked to write a grand epic to celebrate the glory of Augustan age in Rome by Emperor Augustus. So about the entire age itself he has to write, and that became the product of Virgil, that is the Aeneid. And Virgil took Homer's Iliad and Odyssey as his template, and he created an epic that surpasses both of them and created an example for others to follow. But he could not complete the epic, and in his deathbed he wished that manuscript to be burnt. But fortunately his friend and patron Maecenas, who did not follow the last wish of Virgil, kept the manuscript for publishing. So just like other traditional epics, Virgil's Aeneas, the hero of the epic, is son of the goddess Aphrodite. He was prophesied to be the founder of the new Troy, which he set out to build, and finally laid the foundation of the Roman Empire. The entire poem is written in sponte hexameter of almost 12,000 lines, which is very massive. So he also starts with an invocation to the muse and then begins to tell about the wanderings of the hero and the war that he has fought for building the empire. So Virgil asked the muses for help to complete the long narrative poem. Unfortunately, he was not able to complete it. And John Milton's Paradise Lost is also one of the famous English literary epic. He has used blank verse throughout the poem. It is a long poem and it comprises approximately around 12 books of 10,000 lines. And he further, in this poem, he invokes the muses to inspire him, and in his he also mentioned that the muses are not the Greek daughters of Zeus, but the Christian Holy Spirit who inspired Moses and other biblical characters. So an epic poem is nothing but a ceremonial performance, and it is narrated in a ceremonial style, which is deliberately distanced from ordinary speech, and it is proportional to the grandeur and formality of the heroic subject and architecture. Now let us look at the structure of epic. Now there are certain structures that will be followed in order to make that poetry epic poetry. First of all, it has to be long and all the lines should be in a particular meter. The subject matter of the poem should be serious. The language of epic should be formal and the style should be elevated. The hero of the epic poem should be quasi-divine figure or a semi-god itself. The actions of the hero will affect the fate of a tribe, a nation, and the entire human race. So all these are the structure and form of an epic poetry. Next, we can see what are the characteristics of an epic poetry. First one is the epic starts in media res. In media res means in the middle of the things. So in the middle of the story only, the epic starts. The poet invokes the muses in the beginning of the poem to sustain the long poem. So in order to make it a long narrative, the poet invokes the muses. Next characteristic is that the poem mentions supernatural events, which is usually attributed to the will and actions of the gods. Then a list of heroes is mentioned in the poem. The epic heroes are always discussed with epithets. The use of epic similes is mostly prevalent in the poems. And the last characteristic is that the poet remains omniscient throughout the poem. So these are the important characteristics that makes an epic poetry. Thank you.